Hello and welcome back. Or at least I'm assuming it's welcome back. I don't know, maybe you just stumbled upon episode 2 of the Drawn podcast, but I have a feeling that you probably listened to episode 1, didn't entirely hate what you heard, and now you're back for more. Did I get it right? Semi close? Anyways, I'm really excited that you're here no matter how you found this episode because I have a very special guest for all of you. Her name is Michelle Maha Vidya. That is her yoga name because that's exactly what she does. She teaches yoga and meditation along with a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll get into later on in this podcast. She is a great friend and somebody who has been helping me, mentoring me in my own meditation journey, and she has a lot of wisdom to share with all of you because not only does she do and teach yoga and meditation, she's also one of those people who has been where you're probably at right now. She has had a long history of mental illness with postpartum, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, you name it, she's probably been there. And so she teaches from a place of complete understanding and empathy, and she has amazing advice for all of us today. Welcome to Drawn, the podcast that draws you in with stories of hope, healing, and even a little hustle while battling anxiety and depression. Think you have to wait until you've conquered your mental illness to start living a joyful, meaningful life? Think again. Conquering your mental illness is part of living a life you love, and we're going to figure it out together. I'm Katie Rochetko, and this is Drawn. Hey Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you on my first ever podcast episode. You're kind of my guinea pig. I hope that's okay with you.
It's perfect. Thank you, Katie. I'm so happy to be the guinea pig.
I know we've talked a lot, kind of probably for about a month or so now, about everything from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, to meditation, and you have been such an influential part of my journey into meditation, and you have given me so much wisdom. I have enjoyed our conversations. I've enjoyed writing about it in my blog, and now I'm excited to share your words of wisdom directly with all of our listeners. And so really, truly, just thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
So for people who don't know you, I'd really love to just kind of start at the beginning. You know, one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is introduce people to real people who deal with mental health issues because it is such a prevalent thing in our society today. And I just really want to introduce people so that other people who are listening, they get that idea of they're not alone, that we have all in some way, shape, or form probably dealt with some form of anxiety and depression. And so I'd love to start at the beginning with you, if you wouldn't mind just kind of introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you're up to right now, and then let's go back and talk about, you know, the early childhood stages of when you really started to notice anxiety and depression.
Sure. So it's so ironic that you mentioned that we're never alone because I actually reposted something this morning, and it was something that I posted in 2018, and it said, "We're never alone. We're always supported to manifest and to create for the benefit of the collective. Any ideas of separation are an illusion. The quest for personal gain, power, and greed is an outdated mindset. We each have a destiny and a specific role to contribute our gifts to the whole, and fulfilling this mission will bring our optimal joy."
Wow, talk about ironic.
I know, right? And that's kind of what my whole mission is. And, you know, I love to study things on a metaphysical level. And I was challenged with, you know, certain aspects in growing up in teenage years and even through adult years that, you know, led me in dealing with my own anxieties, my own bouts of depression, postpartum depression, and how was I going to heal myself through these things. You know, like many people, I tried to find relief with traditional therapies. I even did the whole medication route, and it just didn't work for me. So I had to figure out what was I going to do and how was I going to deal with this because it's an ongoing issue. You know, and like many people that suffer with depression and anxiety or post-traumatic stress, you know, that it comes back. You know, there's life events that can happen. So you can be doing really good for a long time, and then something happens where you go through a setback. And so my mission was really first to understand myself, and through that, now I've been able to help other people understand and to empathize, but also give them some tools to help them get through their own challenges.
And I am so excited to hear about your tools because they have helped me so much. But let's go back to the beginning and start, first of all, with like, how long have you kind of been in this battling relationship with anxiety and depression? When were you first kind of realizing that this is something that you dealt with?
Probably in my teenage years. I mean, the first time that I ever went to a therapist, I did an assertiveness training because I've always been empathic by nature, so it was really hard for me to say no. It was always easy for me to overextend myself, and in doing that, sometimes I would end up exhausted or taken advantage of. And so those patterns were surfacing, in the late, like 16, 17 years old. So that was when it first started to hit me. By 18, I was starting to look for answers, but I couldn't figure out the formula of what I needed personally to find the right path forward for how could I find a balance in my life completely, and feel whole and feel authentic. And, like everybody else, it's just you try one thing, and if it doesn't work, you try another. And sometimes you take everything and throw all of it at the wall at the same time to see what sticks.
So that's really interesting. So you were a teenager. Now, what was, when you were a teenager, what was kind of, I say, like maybe the world stance on mental health? How did they view it? Because, I mean, being 18, even nowadays, is kind of like, okay, are you really dealing with mental health, or are you just, a moody teenager? So, like, what was kind of like going on in that time period of being a teenager that made you even think that mental health was even really something that you were dealing with?
Well, for me personally, I had dealt with some extreme traumatic experiences, and so I knew that I was going to have to deal with the remnants, the thoughts, the ruminating or the anxiety that's left. And one of the first things that I ever truly identified was the post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was like, even though I might have been labeled being depressed or, at one point, maybe whatever else, I don't know, there was a list at one point. But, the ones that I really started to say, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense, and this doesn't make any sense. What makes sense to me? Because they can tell you that you're 100 things, ADHD or whatever, but you have to really look inside and start some level of introspection to say, what am I? What do I really have? And I think the first bit of where I started going into the metaphysical side was around 18 years old, where someone gave me Linda Goodman's book on sun signs. And so then I started to realize a little bit about astrology, which has come full circle for me because it's something that I'm truly, truly just passionate about learning even to this day. But after the astrology, that didn't have a whole lot because it's just your sun sign, which is very basic. But after a few bouts of postpartum depression, I had 3 children. So after each child, I ended up going through a depression. And at that point, so now we're moving into around the time I was 25, so around the year 2000, they were saying that if you've had depression more than 3 times, that you need to be medicated for life. So
wow.
That was a terrifying aspect for me because I didn't feel like I needed that. I definitely didn't want it. The medicines never worked for me properly. It was always a really odd side effect or something, or that it would mask as something else, and then it would be like, oh, well, now you're this too. So that's where I was like, none of this makes any sense. I want to figure out what's going wrong or going on. So I just started grasping at every medical thing that I could to try to find out if I was having thyroid issues, what my blood or white count levels were, anything and everything that I could do to make sense. And finally, I ended up hearing about something that's referred to as the dark night of the soul. And that was an aha moment for me because it started to make me question, maybe this isn't something physiological or mental. Maybe this is something spiritual that's going on. And then that's where I was hooked because it just made so much more sense. And I was able to start finding other therapies that were more on the metaphysical side, that I was getting more results in a month that I had been getting all these years trying all these other therapies.
Wow. So, in your own words, what do you think the relationship is between the spiritual, the physical, and the mental health of our souls?
Well, I think that there's more, there's what's called in yoga, we have what's 5 koshas, or you have these 5 blendings of energy. So we do have the mind, we have the energetic part, we have our spiritual part, we have our physical part, and we have our mental part. So all these parts are just equally as important to the other, and they all need to be in balance for us to be in the truest part of our well-being.
Wow. So rather than looking at them as like individual compartments, looking at them as a whole.
Or a well-oiled machine. They all need to be working well together, which we've talked about before. So when you start to have negative thoughts, the body starts to react with anxiety. Anxiety is also an energetic expression. You feel something, right? There's something tangible. Your fingers feel the energy of it even. And then your heart starts pounding, and then it can turn into some type of spiritual crisis even if it's gone on long enough, right? Or we're in an extreme depression where some people have led to suicide. That suicide is definitely something that could be attributed to a spiritual reaction. And it just one begets the other. It's that spiral, that we have talked about a couple times. If you keep going down the negative spiral, it will keep going down. We need to reverse and create that spiral in an upward fashion.
Right, absolutely. So, kind of before you found, the metaphysical healing and therapies and yoga meditation and stuff, when you look back on that season before that discovery, how do you picture that time in your life? What does that look like to you?
It really looks like someone very young, just trying to figure out, who am I? What am I doing here? Am I an important part of this process? Do I have something to offer the world? Is it enough? Am I enough? There's all these questions, especially for women going through motherhood, probably at any age, but I was very young. I had my first child at 18. So it's like I was constantly in this battle of what I should be doing, according to society, or my own judgments, and what I'm actually doing. And it created this conflict within myself where I was trying to figure out who I was and to be confident in who I was. And that confidence is something that, I've been working on up to this day. Like, I'm still working on it, but I feel more confident now in who I am than I ever have before.
Wow. Well, that is definitely encouraging because I have a feeling that a lot of people like myself are probably in that season of not knowing that there's hope on the other side. I mean, there's one of these, this season of my life, 2 years ago, where I couldn't even picture where I'm at right now. And now where I'm at now, it's not perfect. It's always like a work in progress, but I picture myself in another 2 years. And it's hard to imagine that some of the issues I'm going through now could ever be resolved. And now that you are on the outside kind of looking back, you're able to see just how much transformation can happen, with the right tools in your life.
It is, and it can happen, like I said, it's not just the continuous growth upward. You're going to go through challenges and setbacks that are going to knock you back down again. But what happens, and now I'm 45, I just came through what's called your Uranus opposition or your midlife crisis. And that time was really challenging. A year ago, I hit that bottom again, and it was a very scary time. And then I had to just say, okay, like, you've already done this several times. You've been through this time and time again. So you do know that there's light at the end of this tunnel, but you've got to figure out how to pull yourself out of it. So I ended up, for that moment where it's really dark, you don't know what to do again. Even if you have all these tools, there's sometimes a feeling like, well, I've done all this, I've practiced yoga for over 20 years. I should just be able to go and meditate and make this all go away. And when that doesn't happen, it starts to make you question. But there comes a diligence that if you don't give up and you just say, okay, well, you have several tools, again, it might be time to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And for me, it was hypnotherapy. And I decided to go and get trained to become a hypnotherapist in past life regression. And I found the answers that I needed for that time in that therapy. And it was another tool that I could add to the box.
So let's go back to the beginning. Like, when did you kind of discover this new way of healing? What did you call it? The metaphysical therapy, and then eventually leading that into like yoga and meditation. Let's talk about that season of your life.
Sure. So yoga and meditation happened through or after the postpartum depressions, where I had been medicated and the medications were not working for me. So I needed to find something else. And I just got so frustrated with it all that I just decided to quit everything, which I don't suggest because it was a very intense time. And now I know how dangerous that actually was. But I was so weak on every level, on all 5 of those levels that we mentioned. And I ended up going to take a Pilates class, but I had anxiety. So it was like to have someone that was more strong, like dictating to you, it wasn't going to work for me. So there was a yoga class that was here local. I live in Rafford, and I ended up taking that class, and I just loved it. And I remember being in tree pose, just standing balance posture, and I had my hands put together in a prayer position over my head. And I just felt, it's kind of that quintessential thing that they say. I heard something just say, this is what you're meant to do. It just was very clear to me. And I started looking for yoga trainings at that point and ended up in Yogaville here in Virginia, which is an ashram and self-contained kind of community. And I did a yoga training there, and I was just hooked because I thought that yoga was just exercise. And it really just opened up my mind and my heart to realize how much is there to learn, and that I'm still learning to this day.
I think that's really interesting, yoga not just being for exercise, because I think of yoga and Pilates as that thing that you do with a gym membership. So what was it about yoga that brought you kind of mental peace?
Well, it was learning that there are 8 limbs of yoga. There are many different forms of yoga, from breathing exercises to meditation to chanting. There's so many aspects of it, and each of them have their own time and purpose, and they're really form-fitting for any kind of individual lifestyle or mindset. There's different kinds of yoga that you can do. And so for me, it was finding that right rhythm of everything that I needed, and I became probably the strongest physically that I had ever been in my life, and the healthiest through yoga that I had ever been in my life.
Did people notice a difference in you once you started doing yoga?
I'm sure that they did, but I noticed the difference from the inside because I felt a smile, on my face. And I do remember my grandmother Helen one day just reacting and saying something about, like, it was so good to see me smiling, but I felt like I was smiling from the inside out for the first time in a really long time.
So when you decided to go to the ashram here in Virginia, what was it about that experience that really took off your journey into being a trainer and being trained in this study?
Well, it's kind of funny. When I showed up there, I didn't know what I had gotten myself into because I had never experienced or seen anything like this place. So I was a little unsure at first, but I stayed for 18 days with a great group. The woman that ran the training, her name is Diane Finlayson, and she runs a group called Yama Therapeutics out of Maryland. And so we all stayed together and kind of created this small little community, where we lived in the same house, we practiced all day, we ate all day, and it was just a really transformative experience by the time I came out of it. And I ran, as a lot of yoga teachers do, your feet hit the mat, and I opened my own yoga studio and started sharing what I had learned.
Let's break it down for people who, like me, don't necessarily understand either the differences between yoga and meditation or really what the relationship is between the two.
Right. So meditation is one of the branches, if you will, of yoga. So with yoga, we all know the physical exercise, and that's referred to as asana. And that asana is the practice, the down dogs, the child pose, the things that, people associate with yoga. But those movements and different things that you do in that physical practice are really there so that you can sit comfortably and be able to meditate. Because, if your bones are hurting or if your muscles are tight and you try to sit in one position for any length of time, you know that it's impossible, right? So we do these physical exercises so that we can strengthen and condition the body to be able to sit or lie down for longer periods of time and kind of desensitize away from the physical body and start to move inward. So we're moving inward through those different aspects where you're going into the mind, but then you're going deeper into the deeper parts of your consciousness and into the subconscious.
And what do you kind of think that a lot of people start to realize the deeper they go into themselves?
Well, there's all kinds of things that you can realize. Eventually, you want to get to the point in your meditation where you have a one-pointed awareness. So it's like observing a flickering candle flame, so that your mind is actually able to understand that it's watching something, and it can observe the candle flickering, but it still might see the light reflections on the outside. But you eventually, there's still thoughts. We're all practicing. I'm not a guru, so I haven't perfected it myself at all. But you just keep at it, and eventually it's that space in between the thoughts that there's true silence. So whether you're using a mantra or an affirmation in your meditation, the meditation isn't in the mantra itself. It's actually in the space in between the mantra where the mind is actually quiet for those few seconds.
Interesting. So what was, I guess, your first, maybe bout with meditation like? Because obviously when you first start meditating, like you've said, it's not easy. I mean, it gets easier, but it's never really easy. But those first few times, I mean, it's a very strange experience to intentionally try and sit still and empty your mind of all of the negative feelings and random thoughts and stuff. So what was that experience like for you those first few times?
For me, one of the best meditations that I really got started on was something called Yoga Nidra, which Nidra means sleep. So this is an extended meditation that's about 45 minutes. That's a desensitizing of the physical body of the senses. So, and then you're kind of counting backwards or counting the breath. You're moving through the physical body several times and not really engaging it. And then that takes you into this deeper level of sleep, where people actually fall asleep. And, some of my older students from the studios, we still joke today about being in Yoga Nidra, and it's like someone wakes up and says, "Who was snoring?" And then you just have to say, "That was actually you." So if you're really desensitized to the point that you don't even know that you're snoring, right? So, and that's normal in meditation, that you're going to rise up above and below that conscious level, which is very normal. So people will think, well, I got down for a minute, I felt like I was, but then I popped back out of it. And that's a very natural transition. You're going to come down and up and down and up and down and up. And then the more that you practice, the deeper that you begin to go.
You've been doing this now for about 20 years. What has, I guess, been the biggest difference in your life between pre-yoga and meditation to where you're at now?
You have more tools. So when you do hit those tough times, you absolutely do have things to fall back on. And if you have a really consistent practice for a really good length of time, if you do fall out of it, then it's easier to get. It's like riding the bike. Once you learn to ride a bike, you know how to ride a bike. So by having these tools in your own toolbox, and that's one of the things that I love working with people. I don't work with people as a traditional therapist where you have to keep coming to me or you're not going to get results. My whole thing is working with people to teach them how to do this on their own so that they can get the results on their own. In the healing community, we have an expression of a light, lighting a light, lighting a light. So the idea is that you want to encourage people to be able to do this on their own so that they can encourage other people. And by that point, you're really being a benefit to society and helping other people help people. And then by the end of it, hopefully we can all have our candles lit.
Well, you have definitely lit my candle, and I'm excited to hopefully that together we can light other people's candles, because I think this is just such an amazing experience that, learning how to meditate. And for me, right now, I'm in the baby stages. I've only been doing it for like maybe 10 minutes a day, and it's got its challenges and stuff. But I think what's important is that we really break down these kind of baby steps into starting this process into meditation. And so where do you recommend people start if they are interested in learning how to meditate and make meditation part of their regular routine?
Well, there's one little adage that we say in yoga, and it's first roll out your mat. So you have to find that place, whether it's creating a place that you can sit in your house or really just rolling out your yoga mat. There's something that has to be there to hold you accountable in your own way personally. So if my mat's laying out in front of me, I'm going to think like, hey, maybe I should get down there and do some yoga. Or if I have a meditation chair or just a special place in my house, creating that sacred area for you is going to be a reminder to take those few moments away each day to dedicate to your practice.
So I think a lot of people have this kind of like fear or this maybe misconception that there's no way that they could find 10 minutes in their day to meditate. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm one of those people that I can spiral if I want to. So what I find is most helpful for me is when those moments come, really thinking about taking, and we all have it. We can look back and say where we've done things or handled things in situations in ways that we wish that we would have done differently. And honestly, when those moments spike up, when the anxiety hits or something happens in our life, if we could just take that 3 minutes even, just to catch our breath and come back centered into who we really are so that we're not so swayed by the circumstances outside of ourselves, we're going to find ourselves in a more grounded, footed position to handle the rest of the day. Where if we choose the other way and we get swept up in this wind or current or whatever it is, if someone says something or does something to us, we can't control those moments in life. We can really only control how we handle it. And I think the best way to handle those kinds of circumstances is what I've learned is to handle myself first.
And what do you mean by that?
Just to do whatever I need to do to come back to center. If it's taking a few deep breaths, if I'm starting to feel that anxiety where my breath is getting shallow, take a few deep breaths. If I'm starting to feel that tension creep up in my shoulders or my back, or where the expression pain in the neck, right? That's a literal sign that there's something there. Maybe doing a few neck rolls, whatever it is to help you come back into your center, to where you're resonating in your own energy. There's a lot of talk now about vibration and frequency. We all have a very unique frequency or vibration. So we need to use these exercises, use the meditation, use the yoga, use the guided meditations. Guided hypnosis even is a great way. Hypnosis and meditation are basically the same thing. So, whatever it is that you need to do to get yourself back centered so that you can put your best foot forward.
Definitely. And I think one of the misconceptions that I've learned that I had about meditation is that meditation is sitting in that crisscross applesauce position on the yoga mat on the floor, hands resting on your knees, palms up, close your eyes, breathing in, breathing out, and that's it. Like perfectly still for 10 minutes to 30 minutes to 2 hours. But one of the things you've taught me is that meditation can take all sorts of different forms and that it's really, up to the individual to figure out what works for them or what works for them in a particular moment. And so I'd love to kind of talk about those different types of meditations that are out there, whether it's silent, whether it's chanting, whether it's walking. Let's talk about those different things.
Sure. And just a little side note, in the beginning, yoga was only taught to men in India. So if you can just imagine how much yoga itself has transformed in the last few hundred, it's a few thousands of years, but, just in our short amount of time, where yoga started, coming over to the U.S., just not even 100 years ago or so. So it's really transforming very quickly, and we're beginning to see its benefit. Now, I'm not one that says, hey, you should go and drink a bottle of wine and go to wine yoga, because I'm more traditional than that necessarily, but definitely don't want anyone hurting themselves or getting bruised up. But you can really take yoga and tailor it to you individually. And like you said, there's many ways. Like a walking meditation is basically where you're just walking, going for a walk, and you're just letting your mind going inward. So you might not necessarily be listening to rock and roll, but maybe you want to put on some nice relaxing instrumental music where you can just kind of zone out or zone in. So that's definitely one way. Another way is kind of like where, you know, in the Christian community, there's like, you know, doing things like Jesus would do it, right? So that you're doing your daily duties in a state of meditation, that you're doing things with an open heart, a kind heart, that you're doing things with an act of service, because karma yoga is one of the paths of yoga. And another one is referred to as Raja Yoga, where Raja Yoga is somewhere where you're focusing on the intellectual. So this is really positive for people that like to study. You know, just like anyone would study scripture in any religion, that's really a meditative process. So it's a form of meditation as well. And then Vijnana Yoga is what we're referring to as the actual sitting and meditating, but that takes practice. So you're going to have to figure out a way that works for you. And maybe it's not the traditional disciplined way. A lot of people like discipline and a lot of people don't. So you have to find what way works for you.
So what do you find is one of the bigger or biggest hindrances that people have against wanting to learn meditation?
I think it's uncertainty, you know, and also that there's a little uncertainty about a lack of control, because things are so crazy in the world today that with the last thing we want is something that we can't control. So I think there's also a fear of like maybe going into meditation and seeing something negative. But it's not really, the same is true of hypnosis. A lot of people are afraid of hypnosis because they think that someone's going to make them quack like a duck, you know, but it's simply not true. You're conscious enough and aware enough to dictate your own experience, you know, and if something negative did arise, you know, you can simply just come out of meditation, or maybe it's coming there for a reason, and that's why a little bit of discernment is necessary in the practices, you know, so that you can say, okay, why is this negative thought coming up? What is it trying to tell me? What is this anxiety that it's bringing? What is that trying to teach me? And separating yourself from the thought. You know, you and I were discussing earlier about that negative spiral and how a negative thought begets a negative thought, you know, but we need to understand that those negative thoughts are just thoughts. So one way is just to watch your thoughts. Watch your thoughts, watch how they make you feel.
Do you believe that we are what we think?
I think that we can become what we think if we think it enough.
So many times we let our thoughts control us. You know, they control our actions, our emotions, how we feel about ourselves. How do you think we can go about correcting our thoughts and taking back control of our thoughts when really sometimes we feel like our thoughts are out of control?
I think that, you know, sometimes you have to be okay with your thoughts being out of control. And if you can learn to separate yourself, you know, so it's almost saying, okay, here's my spirit. The spirit is housing in this body. This body has this mind. So there are almost like three different people going on here, or three different entities, or however you want to, you know, the body, mind, and the spirit, right? So if we can learn to say, okay, how do we work together, and how can my body honor my mind? How can my mind honor my spirit? And how can my spirit honor my body and my mind? So sometimes we have to just say, you know what, mind, you're doing a great job thinking of every possible negative scenario. Thank you for doing that. You're doing a great job at that. And thank you, anxiety, for freaking out in my body, because you're telling me that I need to be alert to this. But let's get back to reality. And sometimes the reality, you know, especially for someone like me that's dealt with post-traumatic stress, that you have to realize the here and the now. And that's a big part of meditation and yoga together, is being present. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves, right now, I'm completely safe. You know, whether it's laying in my bed in the middle of the night where the anxiety is going, you know, sometimes, you know, I've told you before that I'll let the mind run out every possible scenario, but I'm not emotionally attached to it. I know that the mind is just doing what it does. And sometimes the mind is positive and sometimes the mind is negative. But the worst times that I've ever had was when I believed it. So I think that we need to start to separate and discern what is actually truly still valuable, tangible, and happening in the mind versus our reality.
And so one of the questions I asked you earlier was to kind of describe that season of your life before you found the healing powers of meditation and yoga. Now, in this season of life, how do you describe where you're at right now?
I think I'm just there. I'm still practicing, I'm still learning, I still go through the ups and downs, but I am becoming more aware, and it's practice, and I've gone through it multiple times, the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows. I've battled depression several times in my life. I've been through a few dark, nights of the soul, and I've been through my midlife crisis. So, and I've survived it all. So it's like something has to be said for that. And I feel like, hopefully I'm sane. It's up to whoever else that wants to judge, but I'm at peace, and I'm becoming at peace. And sometimes things do come that ruffle or challenge that thought of peace, but I'm learning more that these things that I've learned are very much tangible and relatable, and I've learned them for a reason. And, I've been very deep in my study of astrology recently, and the more that I learn about my astrological chart, the more that it all makes sense, that this is my purpose, this is what I've come to do. I've come not only to experience these hardships, but to find a way through them and to help others find a way through as well.
So one of the questions that you really struggled with, like in your teenage and early adulthood years, is, am I enough? Is that something that you still struggle with now?
Sometimes, absolutely. Sometimes that doubt seeps in. Sometimes we compare ourselves to the shoulds and everything else in the world. But I think that that's what I'm finding. The more that I just come centered into those moments in my own practice, there's no competition there. I am just who I am, and I'm just doing what I feel that I need to do. And the more I think that we become centered with who we really are, and we strip away the illusions of what we think that we should have been, or what other people think we should have been or should be, then we're going to find more peace when we accept where we are. There's a saying, the happiest people are the ones that are the most content with what and where they are right now. And I believe that.
Wow, I love that. I love that so much. So, I guess if you could go back to baby teenage Michelle, is there anything that you would want to tell her as she's going through those darker seasons of her life?
Yes, and I have, because I'm a big proponent of doing child work, whether that's doing hypnosis, where you can go and talk to the inner child, because there's been many times where I have had to go back and it's like a meditation, even be self-guided, just to bring little Michelle or teenage Michelle forward and talk to her. And one of the biggest things is that she's not alone. We all have that fear of being alone, and that I'm always with her, and that I'm going to make decisions today that are going to honor her. And maybe she wasn't honored like she should have been, at certain times, but I'm never going to put her through that again. So I'm going to honor her, and I'm going to take care of her like she's with me, because she is.
Michelle, I have so many questions, and this conversation can go in a million different ways, but we are out of time right now. So my final question to you is really just any advice or resources that you have for people who want to start on a meditative journey and kind of don't know where to begin. Are there any books or, podcasts, anything out there that you recommend people picking up if they do want to dive into this further?
Yeah, I would say go into, like the ashram that is here in Virginia is Yogaville. They have some good resources. The man who started Yogaville is Swami Satchitananda, and he has a book called The Golden Present that's just a daily affirmation book. So I definitely feel like daily affirmations are a positive way to start, just to get your mind kind of focusing inward. But there's very traditional forms of yoga, Satyananda Yoga, and then I have a book, I can send you a link for it, that's Yoga for Beginners, I think by a man named Ramakrishna. And I think for, anything with yoga, just finding someone that you can practice with. I know there's a lot of great people that are doing online classes. I work with people, mostly one-on-one right now on many different aspects, just doing a blend of everything that can work uniquely for that person. But just reaching out to your community. I know there's a lot on Facebook as well. So there's plenty of resources out there. I would just, find someone that resonates with you, that can help guide you. And of course, YouTube is there, so there's a lot of guided meditations, hypnosis, and different things on YouTube as well.
Yeah, the school of YouTube, I mean, it is great. You can pretty much learn how to do anything.
Well, that's how I found the hypnotherapy, was I saw a past life regression, and I called the therapist, and he said, I'm doing a training next week, you should come. And I did. And so you can definitely find support on YouTube.
Definitely. And of course, you are a great resource yourself. So where can people find you? Do you have social media, your website?
Yes, so my website is MichelleMahavidya.com. It's MahaVidya. And I do have a YouTube channel. It's kind of up or down. I go with my creative flow. So sometimes it's flowing out a lot. And sometimes, I'm doing my own reflection and practice. But, I'm steadily putting different things out there. There's a blog on my website, and I am on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Perfect. Well, I will definitely be sure to link to all of that in our notes here of the podcast. And Michelle, once again, I cannot thank you. As far as being a guinea pig goes, I don't think I could have picked a better one than you. This has been great.
Yes, I'm happy to do it. I'm just as passionate about mental health and, coming through things as you are. And let's have more conversations in the future.
Oh, that is going to be a definite for sure. All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Drawn Podcast, empowering women battling anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses. For I believe we've been drawn together to create a life we love. You can find more amazing content at my website, KatieRochetco.com, or follow me on Instagram at The Drawn Collection.